You know what I discovered recently, and I'm sure it's a revelation you've had too if you search to find this video, and that is that there are very few reviews of this game, at least on YouTube. I guess it's not really that surprising. Alien vs Predator came out exclusively for the arcade in 1994 and up until recently had never seen a home release. In 2020 it was included as one of the 16 games loaded onto the Capcom Home Arcade, a completely absurd piece of hardware that nobody bought. The only other way to play this game has been via emulation, which isn't bad, but still a long way from accessible for the average gamer. Seeing as it comes up so often in discussions about the best beat-em-ups of all time, and I just got my hands on said absurd piece of hardware, I thought I'd right this wrong and give this game the review it deserves. So, stop your grinnin' and drop your linen, we're about to review Alien vs Predator, the arcade game. Alien vs Predator, which I'm just going to shorten to AVP from here on out, was first released in 1994 as one of the earliest games to use Capcom's CPS2 hardware. 94 was right at the beginning of the golden age for 2D Capcom games, with titles like Darkstalkers, Children of the Atom, Armored Warriors and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo all coming out that year. Man, it was a good time to be a kid. AVP was originally supposed to coincide with the first AVP film. Unfortunately, it would take another 10 years for the film to happen, and by that time the script that the game had been based on had been thrown out. It's a shame because the original script was based on the AVP comic series from Dark Horse. It's actually possible to find the first draft of this script online, and while the game isn't a direct tie-in, it shares a similar story and characters. The game was received well in arcades and it seemed like a no-brainer to get a home port, but this never materialised. It's not entirely clear why, but my guess is it probably had something to do with the licensing and/or Capcom didn't think there'd be enough interest due to there not being a movie to tie into. It might have been considered too mature for audiences on console at the time as well. There was a port plan for Sega's 32X at one point, although it's hard to find anything concrete on it, let alone screenshots, so it's probably safe to assume it didn't get far into development, if at all. Your three options for playing it in 2021 are getting yourself an original CPS2 arcade board, the aforementioned Capcom Home Arcade, or some form of emulation. For this review, I've mostly been playing it on the Capcom Home Arcade. Mostly. It has a few disadvantages which we'll get into later, but it is the original ROM, not a port, and it's easily the most accessible.
I got it.
AVP is a typical 2D belt-scrolling brawler, where you choose from one of 4 unique characters and battle through 7 stages, each ending in a boss fight. There's also an awesome section where you ride on top of the APC from the Aliens film, and yes, it has an elevator stage. All the expected Alien variants are here too, so you've got your basic drones, runners, facehuggers, chestbursters, and then there's the more powerful Royal Guards and the Queen. There's a couple of new alien types too, and you'll also fight infected humans, soldiers, a mad predator, and it wouldn't be an Alien game without a powerlifter. It's pretty short by modern standards, most coin-op brawlers of the time are, but it's on par with other beat-em-ups of the era. Depending on how good you are, it can be beaten in about half an hour or less, which is similar to Final Fight or Captain Commando. If you've played any other brawler, you're going to feel right at home with the controls. You have an attack button, a jump button, and a fire weapon button. Each character has their own unique moveset, which is surprisingly deep given how few buttons there are. Firing your weapon can only be done for a short amount of time before it overheats. You can't just endlessly spam it, unless you get the Super Magazine pickup, which lets you do exactly that for a limited time. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4 characters to choose from, 2 human cyborgs and 2 predators. These all fall into the typical brawler archetypes. Major Dutch Schaefer is the tank of the bunch, dealing massive damage, but he's slow as shit. He's a bit like Hager from Final Fight or even Max from Streets of Rage 2. Lieutenant Kurosawa is the fast ninja of the group and plays a bit like Kunoichi from the Ninja Warriors. Despite having only appeared in this game as a playable character, she's made cameos in other games like Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Street Fighter 3 Second Impact. Her design was apparently the influence for Ibuki from the Street Fighter series, which is referenced in Street Fighter 3, where Ibuki has a friend named Serai Kurosawa. If I'm honest, I don't see much of a resemblance. The hair, I guess? The Warrior Predator is the senior of the 2 Yaochuas, and he's basically the Cody of the group. He's pretty good at everything, although doesn't really excel in any one department. The hunter is a bit more fragile than the warrior, although he's faster, has a wicked spinning dive attack, and even has a dragon punch, because Capcom. Being a coin-op means that on the default difficulty it's pretty hard, so you may need more than a few credits to complete it. The bosses in particular are clearly supposed to gobble up credits, because some of them can kill you in as little as 2 hits. You can lower the difficulty via the dip switches, which might make it more enjoyable if a less hardcore experience is what you prefer, or you could simply get good. Alternatively, you can jack it all the way up to the hardest setting for some straight up bullshit. You can play it by yourself, but like most brawlers, it's definitely more fun with a buddy. It doesn't have a ton of replay value other than trying to get high scores. There aren't any alternative routes, different endings, or hidden characters to unlock. From a gameplay point of view, it's a relatively straightforward beat 'em up that doesn't really break the mold. The main difference with other brawlers is the focus on weapon-based combat. It's still predominantly a fisticuffs brawler, but in addition to each character having their own projectile weapon, there are loads of other weapons you can pick up and use. From guns to flamethrowers to what I think is a grenade launcher, maybe? The team behind it didn't take any risks or try and reinvent the genre. This makes a lot of sense if you think about it. It's a licensed game that undoubtedly was developed within a strict deadline to coincide with the movie. That would have meant delivering the best possible game in the shortest time frame, and using the same formula that worked in their previous games was the smart choice. This isn't a knock against the game, it's an extremely solid brawler, with tight controls, fun gameplay, and an amazing presentation. There's a reason Capcom 2D games are held in such high regard. Every attack has a satisfying sense of weight to it, particularly Dutch's Power Slam, which momentarily freezes the action and shakes the screen. The combat is fluid and flexible, allowing you to chain moves together, and even after many hours of playing it, I'm still discovering new things I didn't realise were possible. It feels frantic too, with loads of enemies covering the screen, attacking from every direction. Where it really shines though is with its faithfulness to the source material. There are heaps of little nods and references to both franchise as well as the AVP comics. All the alien character designs look spot on, and yes, the pulse rifle and smart guns have authentic firing noises. If the sprite work and visual design look familiar, that's because many of the artists and designers who worked on the game were responsible for a number of Capcom's other popular titles, such as Marvel's Superheroes, the Alpha and Darkstalkers series, Street Fighter 3, and the crossover games like X-Men vs Street Fighter. Every character is beautifully animated, including the various alien and human enemies. The attention to detail is really on another level, and you can tell that the designers had a real passion for this project. My one nitpick with the presentation would be that I've always thought that the Predator's feet look like tree stumps. Like, seriously, what's going on here? The sound design is a bit of a mixed bag. The music gets the job done, but isn't anything special. It's not bad, but there aren't any memorable tracks, and it tends to get drowned out during gameplay. The sound effects, on the other hand, are awesome. All of the explosions and weapons sound great, and I especially love the way Dutch announces he's picked up something.
I got it.
As I mentioned earlier, the 3 ways to play it are an official arcade board, emulation, and the Capcom Home Arcade. Each has its pros and cons, and what's best for you is likely to come down to preference and convenience. Playing it on an original CPS2 arcade board in a cabinet with 3 sticks is undoubtedly the best way to experience it, but this option is probably out of most people's price range. Emulation, on the other hand, can be a very affordable solution if you run it via MAME. Setting up controllers and outputting it to a large enough screen for 3 players is a bitch though, but if you just want to see what it's like, then this isn't a bad option. The Mister very recently got support for it, and like most arcade ROMs, it probably runs better than on software emulators like MAME. But unless you already have a Mister, this again isn't a cheap way to play it. The Capcom Home Arcade is the only official option outside of an arcade board, and again it's emulated using FB Alpha. Like most emulation, there's a bit of lag, but otherwise it's pretty accurate. Unfortunately, due to the limitations of the hardware, you can only have a maximum of 2 players. However, on the positive side, the Home Arcade will plug into any HDMI TV, and the arcade buttons and sticks give it a very authentic feel. The price of the Home Arcade was originally $400 Australian, but you should be able to get it much cheaper now. The only problem is it's hard to know how long these will be around for, and they may not even be available by the time you see this video. Alien vs Predator the arcade game is still a blast to play and a real treat for anyone who's a fan of the films and comics. The gameplay is very familiar, but it's one of the finest examples of the genre. Hopefully one day Capcom includes it in a collection for modern hardware so that more people get to play it. Ideally, I'd love to see a remastering in the same vein as the Ninja Warriors, or the Sam Show collection that had a ton of behind the scenes content. There's undoubtedly a good story behind the making of this game which is yet to be told. For now, your options for playing it are still limited, but I'd say check it out on MAME at the very least. There's a reason this is regarded as one of the greatest beat-em-ups of the 16-bit era, and if you're a fan of belt side-scrollers, you owe it to yourself to play it. If you enjoyed this video, a like is always appreciated, and of course a dislike will let me know that I need to improve. If you're new around here, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when new videos go live. And if you want to support the channel and learn more about how I make these videos, then head on over to the Patreon page. Otherwise, thanks for your time.
Fuck!